Think for yourself. Question authority.
What's up, guys? Welcome back. Now, first of all, what you're looking at is gameplay of Xenoblade Chronicles X running on the Wii U. Yes, that is the Wii U. The reason why it looks so good is because I'm using the M cable, and what the M cable is, I did a review on this cable last year, is that it does extra graphics processing in the cable itself by actually adding sharpness and anti-aliasing to the image, making your older games look a lot better and reducing jagged edges and things like that. That is why the game looks so good. So no, it is not emulated. It actually is running on the Wii U hardware, and it looks fantastic. And we will be talking in depth about this game and the possibility of it coming to the Nintendo Switch as one of the rumored Wii U ports of 2020, along with most likely what my guess is Super Mario 3D World. Before we get into that, we will talk about Nintendo's statement about Switch models for 2020, and we're going to talk about what Serkan Toto said regarding this in reply to Nintendo and his take, because he was the guy that got this ball rolling on January 2nd, I believe. He said that he was 100% sure that Nintendo would be releasing a more powerful Nintendo Switch in 2020 with 4K support, $399, and of course beefed up components. And then 4 days later, on January 6th, Digitimes reported that Nintendo was entering mass production of a new Nintendo Switch model that would have a magnesium alloy body and an enhanced CPU or SoC of the console, and they would be releasing this new Switch at the midway point of 2020. And various YouTubers, websites were all reporting this, and everybody was on board, of course, for a new, more powerful Switch coming in 2020 at that point, because when you have reports of production, basically from Foxconn, suppliers leaking info to Digitimes, then of course you have it being backed up by Mochizuki from the Wall Street Journal with his information about a new Nintendo Switch coming with an enhanced display, the sharp IGZO screens that he reported on in August 2019, and then it being backed up, of course, by Serkan Toto as well. So you had three respected sources backing this information up at the very beginning of January 2020 that this new Switch would be coming this year, and that Nintendo was entering production in first quarter of 2020, you see. And that was before Nintendo even said anything about their plans for 2020. If you haven't been subscribed to this channel since early 2019, then perhaps you were not expecting this, but this was to be expected for what Nintendo did say in their investors meeting, because they have done this each and every time a console was rumored to be in production or to be rumored to be coming. They have denied it until basically they would just announce it. Same thing happened with the DS Lite. Same thing happened with the 3DS XL, and of course the same thing happened last year in January 2019 when Nintendo denied they were making new Switch models, and then of course they denied it yet again before E3 in 2019, and then a few months after that they announced the Switch Lite to be released in September of 2019. But the interesting thing about the 2019 information is that Nintendo denied they were making new Switch models at the beginning of that year before it was reported by Nikkei and the Wall Street Journal in March and April of 2019 that Nintendo was making two new Switch models starting in 2019 and then onwards after that when they talked about further upgrades with a sharp IGZO display. So in 2019 in January, Nintendo denied they were making new Switch models, and then it was reported a few months later that they were. So multiple reports kept coming from that point forward, and now in 2020, at the beginning of the year, Digitimes reported before Nintendo even said anything about denying a Switch coming that they were actually going to be starting production of a new, more powerful Switch. So during this whole month of January, everyone was on board, and we had these big YouTubers with over 1 million subscribers reporting on this information, getting lots and lots of views. And then of course Nintendo had to go and shut that down because most likely, as you could expect, what do they want to do during this first half of 2020? Well, they're going to want to sell Nintendo Switch models and Switch Lite models. So quite honestly, that was to be expected at this meeting. It wasn't really a big deal. However, the guy who got the ball rolling in 2020, Serkan Toto, did have some questions and choice words about this statement from Nintendo in regards to, of course, the information that was reported, because the information was pretty much exact on some of the things that were going to be starting production for this new Switch by Digitimes. So let's take a look at what Serkan Toto said here. So another Twitter user questioned him asking, curious if you have doubts after Nintendo's recent no plans to launch a new Switch model statement, or think there's wiggle room in how they said it. we'll just do it, quote unquote. And then he replied, "You never know with Nintendo, but I think they were wary of the Osborne effect." And if you're not sure what the Osborne effect is, I'll read you the definition. It says the Osborne effect is the term used to describe a negative outcome from a company prematurely releasing information about future products and impacting sales of their current products. The Osborne effect is normally seen when the company misjudges the timing for announcing the future products. So going back to what Serkan Toto said, he said, "You never know with Nintendo, but I think they were wary of the Osborne effect and made it very clear a Pro isn't coming in 2020 early in the year. This wasn't a random line, but a prepared statement also printed into a forward-looking document for investors." And then the reply to that was, "Not either way, seems smart to say to make sure people buy themed systems / keep buying lights." Then Serkan Toto replied, "Yes, and you want to do this in January of the calendar year in question." And then he says, "I still wonder how the Digitimes article could be so specific. Metal chassis, Nintendo negotiates prices of chassis, production starts in Q1 2020, plus how Switch inventory looks so different for this year." Now that's another interesting thing that I didn't talk about earlier in January because I didn't think it was a big deal, because Digitimes reported that Nintendo was developing a new Switch for 2020. But since this has come up, the interesting thing about the inventory issue from what he's talking about here is that another user pointed this out in a separate piece of information earlier in January that coincided with this report from Digitimes for this new Switch coming in 2020, and that was that the inventory of the Switch was drastically lower as far as what they had left over compared to previous years. And this user, Piranha Plant Capital, has access to this information, and Serkan Toto referred to him for a question about what he meant about this thing with Switch inventory. And here's what he said: "There were 4 million Switches in the channel at 12/31, 52 million shipped, minus 48 million sold through, same as 2018 as far as the disparity was concerned." Then he says, "However, 12/31, December 31st, 2019 inventory is negative 45% year on year. At most, there are 7 million unsold Switches in existence at 12/31, 2019. That's pretty lean with Animal Crossing coming in March. Production of Switches has to restart soon." And earlier in January, this user did a whole thing about Switch Pro, or this more powerful Switch, making sense because of this fact of the inventory being drastically lowered, meaning that Nintendo was preparing to fill the market with a new model of the Nintendo Switch at that time. So what Nintendo has been physically doing behind the scenes, as far as Foxconn has been leaking information from what production things they have seen from what they're preparing to produce for Nintendo, and then reporting that information to Digitimes, and then with this information being backed up by Serkan Toto and Mochizuki from the Wall Street Journal, from what Nintendo has actually been doing and preparing, of course, is different from what they're saying to their investors, to the public. And having 45% less inventory is a drastic amount compared to previous years. So as far as production is concerned, it does look like they're looking to release a new Switch in 2020 physically from those numbers. And that 45% number drop would not be related to this Animal Crossing Nintendo Switch design that they have coming out, because that is the same exact Nintendo Switch with just decals on them and different colored Joy-Cons. So it's not related to that. Obviously, there's something going on here in Nintendo's production lines. And of course, this was reported before Nintendo could release their financials to investors. So of course, for Nintendo to avoid this quote-unquote Osborne effect and giving any type of hints or clues that a new Switch was in production, they stamped that out right away. They wanted people to stop talking about it, and they want you to go out and buy the Nintendo Switch with confidence that it's not going to be replaced right away like that. So of course they're going to say, despite all this information to the contrary, that they have no plans to launch a new Nintendo Switch model during 2020. That makes perfect logical sense, because Nintendo is a multi-billion-dollar company that has these goals of a certain amount of revenue to bring in. If they are planning to release a new Switch in mid-2020, so they're going to have to sell as many Switch models as possible that they have left in stock in order to continue to clear that stock, since it is shown that they are ordering less and producing less than what they had before in previous years, indicating a slowdown of production of this current Nintendo Switch, which leaves room for a new Switch to come at some point this year, as was reported by Digitimes and leaked by Foxconn to them. And the funny thing about all this is that I know people say, well, Nintendo can't just lie to their investors, right? Or to their consumers. And while that's true, they can't just quote unquote lie. But since they worded it in the way by saying we have no plans to to launch a new Switch in 2020, that doesn't mean they're saying we promise or saying we guarantee there will be no new Nintendo Switch in 2020. That's different than saying we have no plans. And then on top of that, at the end of this presentation, Nintendo had a disclaimer on this presentation for this financial outlook for the Nintendo Switch. And this is pretty funny when you see this, because it basically gives Nintendo a big out here if they do decide to change their mind and then release a new console either way in 2020 due to this. Now read what this says with me. This came at the very end of their presentation for January 31st, 2020. It says, disclaimers. The contents of this briefing, as well as the accompanying documents and materials, are based upon the information available and the judgments which can be made at the time of the announcement. Nintendo is not responsible for updating or changing these materials if the information presented changes due to future circumstances or for other reasons. Also, forecasts referred to in this briefing and accompanying documents and materials involve known and unknown risks and uncertainties. Please note that such risks and uncertainties may cause actual results to be materially different from the forecasts. So going back to that, what it says here, it says Nintendo is not responsible for updating or changing these materials if the information presented changes due to future circumstances or for other reasons. And that includes their judgments on the things that they talked about in that information. So basically Nintendo says, hey, if we have a change of plan or something crazy happens in the future, we're saying right here that Nintendo is not responsible for the changes that could happen in the future if need be. So really what it looks like here is Nintendo is waiting to show their cards for 2020 still. There is no Nintendo Direct yet. There's nothing announced. But what is coming soon is PlayStation 5's reveal. Now, whatever Sony reveals with PlayStation 5 could have a big effect on Nintendo, and Nintendo may not know that just yet. Nintendo is waiting to see exactly what PlayStation is going to reveal, and if that does have a big effect on Nintendo for some reason that we will have to wait and see about, Nintendo does have the ability here, since it was reported they are in production for a new console, then Nintendo would have the ability to respond if need be, you see. So that's basically why you gotta look at the big picture here, because there's more evidence than ever before that Nintendo is actually working on a new console and they are going to be starting production and they are planning to release it this year. But of course they need to sell the Nintendo Switch and the Switch Lite as much as possible. If Nintendo could just keep selling the same consoles forever and ever and ever, they would, because that would be the cheapest thing for them to do to make the most money back on their investments and selling of the consoles. If you don't have to release a new console, that's a lot less money you got to spend in developing that console. But with big changes coming in the industry with PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X, obviously Nintendo is preparing to be ready, because of all the information that has been revealed does in fact support that more than ever before. So a good example where this will happen will be, say PlayStation 5 is announced and there's various different things about it that cause the market to shift, and then purchases of the Nintendo Switch are actually affected and people start putting their money down on PlayStation 5 and its products. Then Nintendo can see that as a change in market conditions, and then they will go ahead and then announce this new Switch for 2020, even though they had no plans to officially from their investors, because they want to sell as many of these consoles as possible. That would be the scenario where they would say plans have changed, and of course Nintendo would not be caught off guard because they do have things in production and they have been working on this hardware for quite a long time. So basically that is where we stand, and of course as we go forward, this is not going to be the end. We're going to be seeing more reports as we go forward about this, no doubt, because as we know, what Nintendo says and what Nintendo does are two 100% completely different things, and they do this consistently all the time with their hardware. So we will of course wait and see what happens with all these things, but quite frankly I expected this, and this isn't surprising whatsoever. If you've been following me since early 2019, you probably should have expected Nintendo to deny any new models coming in 2020 in the first place. But if you're new to this channel, I can understand why this may have come as a shock to you, even though Nintendo was never announced or told investors that they were releasing a new console in their investors meetings. They have never done that. In fact, they have always denied it consistently throughout their history. So yeah, this is to be expected, and we will see where it goes from here. And we have PlayStation 5 about to be revealed, and who knows, I may be covering some things on PlayStation 5 in this channel after they reveal it. We'll have to wait and see exactly what they reveal. Of course, if it is interesting enough and game-changing enough, then maybe I will cover it on this channel, but we will wait and see what happens with Sony. but that will be very interesting to see what Nintendo's reaction is after that. So Xenoblade Chronicles X on the Wii U was my favorite Wii U game on the system. I put well over 100 hours in that game. It was a fantastic game. I know it was kind of divisive between fans. Some people really didn't like that game. They thought it was really bad for some reason. I thought it was great. I thought the story was really good, and I thought for the most part the missions were well organized, the graphics were fantastic, and the gameplay was really fun, especially with those skells. And with the rumors going around with 2 new Wii U games coming to the Nintendo Switch in 2020, quite possibly being Super Mario 3D World being one of them, which I think that might be a given in my opinion, but Xenoblade Chronicles X has been rumored for quite a long time. Ever since the Switch was announced in 2016, it was one of the first rumored games to be in development as a port to the Nintendo Switch. So Xenoblade Chronicles X does have a very good chance of being the last Wii U game ported to the Nintendo Switch this year, and it makes perfect sense because Nintendo is releasing the Xenoblade Chronicles Remaster this year as well. So for those who are not familiar with the first Xenoblade Chronicles, they can also be introduced to a very different game, Xenoblade Chronicles X, on the Nintendo Switch as well. Not necessarily at the same time, but it would make good sense to release that game along with Xenoblade Chronicles as kind of like a 1-2 punch, and to have all 3 games released on the Nintendo Switch. Because of how different the game is than the first Xenoblade Chronicles, it is a very, very different game. The first Xenoblade Chronicles is very character-based, story-driven, and Xenoblade Chronicles X follows more of a MMO type of experience, where it is a full-story RPG, of course, but you play it as a voiceless character that you make yourself and you customize, and you have all kinds of side missions and missions to take place in this big, gigantic world. And I do believe it is the absolute biggest video game world that was ever created in all of gaming history. As far as the actual size of it compares to other games like The Witcher 3, Breath of the Wild, I do believe it is the biggest game ever made in that sense. So a Switch port coming quite possibly in the fall or in December time of 2020 would be a really good choice, because Xenoblade Chronicles X came out in December of 2015. That would mark the 5-year anniversary of the game. But there was some issues with the game I'd like for them to improve upon with the Switch port, and that would be mainly the city hub basically needs to be improved. There's really bad pop-in and all kinds of weird glitches in the city, and even a lot of frame rate hiccups in that hub city world that can be ironed out a lot in the Switch port. For how detailed and beautiful the game is, the hub world that you spend a lot of your time in looks the absolute worst of the game in Xenoblade Chronicles X. So if they can improve that city hub by quite a bit, and as far as its visuals are concerned and the pop-in is concerned, I think that would help even out the visual presentation of the game quite a bit compared to the rest of the game, which looks absolutely beautiful, but that city hub looks by far much worse than the rest of the game. And some other things I want them to improve upon would be a lot of these side quests and missions they have in Xenoblade Chronicles X are absolutely worthless and don't bring any value to the game at all. There's all kinds of these little missions that make absolutely no sense, and fetch quests that make no sense, which require a lot of running around aimlessly, just looking and hoping you find certain items. And sometimes these items don't even appear where they should be appearing on the map, and you actually have to get lucky to find some of these items to complete your missions. And those type of things I think really need to be taken out of the game, because it distracts and detracts from the overall enjoyment of that game. I think they should cut those down a bit, and then if they can, add more detailed and better submissions and take out some of those worthless fetch quests that they do have in the game already. And I think that would make the overall experience way better, way smoother, and going out and upgrading your characters would be a lot more enjoyable. There's also some things with the skulls I want them to change in this port as well, and that would be the ability to change your camera perspective from being inside the cockpit and outside the cockpit, because for some reason in Xenoblade Chronicles X, the camera automatically goes into cockpit mode for no reason, and you can't control it and you can't get out of it. It can be very disorientating, so if they take that out of the game, I think that would be very nice, and just give you the option if you want to go into that cockpit mode during battle mode with a skull. Make it your option to do that, not have you forced to do that. Now that being said, even though it's kind of disorientating, it doesn't really detract from the battle experience. It just makes it so like, hey, wait a second, I can see my character and now I'm in cockpit mode. It doesn't really make any sense. I think the designers of the game simply did that out of their want for an artistic choice, but I do think I would prefer to have it as an option and not have it forced upon the user. Also, a lot of the enemies in Xenoblade Chronicles X are basically bullet sponges. They sit there and take hit after hit after hit forever. A lot of these battles simply just take way too long. Even if you're overpowered and level up against certain characters, a lot of these battles simply take way too long for no reason. So I do think there are some adjustments that can be made since you do face a whole bunch of them for a very long period of time. If they make certain enemies less of a bullet sponge, not all of them mind you, but certain enemies less bullet spongy, quote unquote, I do think that'll make a much better experience for the overall battle system of the game as well. Also, during battle, I do hope they add some animations to your jumping. It doesn't really have to change how you do the battle system itself, but if you do have the ability to flip maybe and jump away from opponents that you're facing, that'll make it look a lot better than the same jumping animation you have while you're running just normally in the world. That'll make it look a lot better during battling to actually have a jump animation during battles. It'll make a lot more sense in the animation routine way. If you use jumping during battling in that sense, it will look a lot different than how you would use it when you're just running in the world by itself. It shouldn't be the exact same jump animations, what I'm saying. They should make it more dynamic when you're in battles. And for my last request for an improvement and upgrade for Xenoblade Chronicles X for the Nintendo Switch, I do hope they are able to actually improve upon the mouth animations go on characters' faces when they talk, because they're very static. They don't move very much in the game. So when characters are talking, if they can be more emotive, a little bit more facial recognition and emotion in the way they speak, I think that'll be a huge improvement in evoking emotion in the characters when you see them in the story cutscenes. And I know this game is huge, so that might be too much to ask for, but that is something that would improve upon the overall presentation of the game and make it better, of course. So that's everything I can think of for the improvements in the game. If you can think of things for the Switch port, let me know in the comment section. But I do really hope this game does come out on the Switch, because it does deserve a re-release and an improved port. I think it's an underappreciated game compared to the other games in the series. With some of the improvements I talked about, I do think it could be reaching that next level type of experience on the Switch, which has a much higher user base, of course, than the Wii U ever dreamed of having. So again, with all that in mind, thanks so much for watching. If you did enjoy this video, please hit the like button, subscribe for more, and I'll talk to you very soon in the next video. Have a great day.